My name is Marlo Holt. I'm 27, born and raised in Boston, and I manage one of the most successful real estate portfolios on the East Coast. You'd think that would make my family proud. Instead, tonight, they humiliated me in front of dozens of guests at our annual family gala. My father handed the microphone to my older brother, announcing him as the future head of the Holt Empire. While I stood right beside them, the one who's actually been running the company for the past 3 years. When I tried to speak up, my mother grabbed my wrist under the table and hissed, "Don't make a scene. Know your place." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Tell me, what would you have done if your own family tried to erase you like that? The chandeliers above us sparkled like frozen tears, reflecting on the marble floor as if the house itself was watching silently. My father, Richard Holt, stood tall in his black tuxedo, one hand resting on Preston's shoulder like he was crowning a prince. The crowd cheered, glasses clinked, and for a second I thought maybe I had misheard. But then my brother leaned closer to the mic and said, "Thank you, Dad. I promise to honor the Holt legacy. I'll lead us into the future with strength and vision." Strength and vision. My strategy. My sleepless nights, my deals, my spreadsheets, my quiet battles in boardrooms full of men who never looked me in the eye but respected the results I brought. Preston had walked into meetings late, signed what I prepared, smiled for the cameras, and somehow that made him the heir. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. My fingers curled around the stem of my champagne glass. My mother, Alina, noticed the shift in my posture. She reached for my wrist under the table, her nails digging just enough to warn me without leaving a mark. Her eyes were sharp. "Smile," she mouthed. The room blurred. I heard people whispering behind me, "She must be furious." I thought she was the brains, poor thing. Every word stung. My entire life had been built on the idea that if I worked hard enough, one day they'd see me. That night, I realized they had seen me all along, they just didn't care. When the speech ended, Preston raised his glass. "To the future of Holt Real Estate?" Everyone toasted. I lifted my glass too, but inside I was screaming. Not out loud, no. I smiled, nodded, played my role, but deep in my chest something cracked. Not a clean break, a fracture. The kind that spreads slowly until everything collapses. After the applause died down, I quietly slipped through the crowd. My heels clicked against the floor like a metronome to my rising anger. Outside, the night air was cold enough to bite. The garden lights illuminated rows of trimmed hedges and statues imported from Europe, because of course my father thought stone figures made us look cultured. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breath. Footsteps behind me. Preston, running away from the spotlight. His voice had that smug lilt I'd hated since childhood. "I wasn't in the spotlight," I replied without turning. "I was stage daker." He laughed. "Come on, Marlo, don't be dramatic. You know how this works. Dad builds, I lead, you support, you're good at that." I turned to face him. "I've been running this company while you've been playing golf in the Hamptons." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And you've been doing a fine job, keep it up, you make me look good." He patted my shoulder like I was an intern. For a moment, I imagined smashing my glass against the stone fountain. Instead, I inhaled sharply and let the freezing air burn my lungs. Preston walked away humming, utterly convinced of his superiority. That was the moment my anger stopped being emotional and became strategic. I wasn't going to beg for recognition anymore. I was going to take back what was mine. When the last of the guests left, and the house fell into that eerie kind of silence that only mansions have, I found myself wandering through the long corridor that led to my old bedroom. The portraits on the walls followed me with glassy eyes, generations of Holts in gilded frames, each one more self-important than the last. My father loved those portraits. "A family legacy is built on names and faces," he used to say. Funny how my face was never included. I opened the door to my childhood room. It looked exactly the same as when I left for college. Pastel wallpaper, a piano in the corner, a bookcase lined with trophies that no one ever cared about. Debate competitions, real estate case studies, academic awards, they gathered dust because they didn't fit the Holt image. Preston had baseball medals and charity plaques displayed downstairs. Mine stayed here out of sight. I sat at the piano and pressed a single key. The sound echoed softly, like a memory that hadn't faded yet. This was where everything began, the lessons I was forced to take, the discipline drilled into me, the expectations that were never met. My mother's voice filled my head. "Marlo, sit up straight. A Holt doesn't slouch." My father's colder. "Good, but not good enough. Preston did it better at your age." It's strange how pain doesn't always hit you in moments of chaos. Sometimes it creeps in quietly when you're alone in a room you used to call yours. I remembered the summer I was 13, the first time I closed a deal for my father's company. It was a small plot of land near Cape Cod. The adults thought it was cute to let me practice. I spent weeks researching zoning laws, negotiating with local owners, and finally convinced them to sell. I walked into my father's office, holding the signed papers like they were a treasure. He didn't even look up from his cigar. "Good work," he said flatly. "Preston, come here, take these to legal." And just like that, the credit was his. It happened again when I was 17, this time with a real development project. I stayed up every night running numbers while Preston was out partying. When the deal closed, the press release had his name on it. I asked my father why. He replied, "Investors like a male figurehead. Don't take it personally." I did. I took it personally every single time. Back then, I thought if I kept proving myself, things would change. I enrolled at Harvard, graduated top of my class, came back to the family business like the dutiful daughter they wanted. I rebuilt crumbling departments, turned losses into profit, and signed contracts that saved the company millions. But at every gala, every press conference, Preston was the one on stage. I was the girl in the background, holding the clipboard. I lay back on my old bed, staring at the ceiling. The chandelier above was smaller than the ones downstairs, but it still cast fractured light across the room. I traced the patterns with my eyes, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. For years, I blamed myself for not being enough. Tonight, for the first time, I saw it clearly. The problem wasn't me, it was them. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from my mother, "Don't overthink tonight. Preston will lead, you'll support. That's how it's always been. Let's not ruin family harmony." I stared at the message until my vision blurred. Family harmony? That was her way of saying, know your place. Another message popped up, this time from Preston. "No hard feelings, sis. You're great at what you do. Keep making me proud." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type something scathing, something that would burn. Instead, I deleted every word and put the phone down. I wasn't going to waste my rage on a text. I walked over to the window. The city stretched out in the distance, glittering under the night sky. Somewhere out there were people building their own futures, not trapped in someone else's story. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered to the glass, "I deserve more than this." That whisper turned into a promise. The next morning, the mansion was buzzing with post-gala chatter. Servants cleared champagne glasses from the hallway while my parents entertained a few lingering guests over brunch. I didn't join them. Instead, I slipped out early, taking the familiar drive into the city. The Holt Real Estate headquarters sat like a glass monolith in the heart of downtown Boston. 50 floors of steel, ambition, and quiet power. I used to feel proud walking into that building. Now, as I pushed through the revolving doors, all I felt was a strange kind of clarity, like I was seeing it for what it truly was for the first time, a monument built partly by my hands but with someone else's name on it. "Morning, Ms. Holt," the receptionist greeted warmly. "Morning, Claire," I replied, forcing a smile. She didn't deserve the bitterness swelling inside me. In the elevator, I watched my reflection in the mirrored walls. Tailored navy suit, hair perfectly tied, expression composed. I had perfected the look of quiet competence. It had been my armor for years. As soon as the elevator opened on the 28th floor, my assistant, Nora, rushed toward me. "Marlo, they've moved up the project meeting to 10. Preston's already in the boardroom." "Of course he is," I muttered under my breath. The boardroom was already full when I entered. Preston stood at the head of the table, grinning like he owned the place. On the screen behind him was a presentation I had spent the last 6 months perfecting, our latest mixed-use development in Providence. Every graph, every zoning adjustment, every strategic partnership, all mine. "Ah, there she is," Preston said. "My brilliant little sister." Everyone, Marlo was kind enough to handle the boring details so I could focus on the big picture. Polite laughter filled the room. I took my seat, my jaw tightening. He walked the board through my strategy, taking credit for my forecasts, and my parents sat there, front row, nodding proudly, as if this was exactly how it should be. At one point, he misquoted a critical regulation, and without even looking at me, my father barked, "Marlo, fix it." I corrected him smoothly. Preston winked at me like we were a team. We weren't. Halfway through the meeting, I tried to speak up. "Actually, I'd like to clarify something about the zoning plan," my father interrupted without even looking my way. "Marlo, don't interrupt your brother, let him finish." The room went silent. My cheeks burned. Preston smirked, then continued. As I was saying, I leaned back in my chair, pressing my nails into my palm to keep from exploding. I'd been through this cycle so many times: do the work, watch him bask in the glory, get scolded if I dared to step out of line. But something was different this time. It wasn't just humiliation, it was awakening. When the meeting ended, the executives crowded around Preston, shaking his hand like he was some visionary. I slipped out quietly. Nora followed me, whispering, "That was your deck." "Yeah," I said softly, "and they all know it." In my office, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline. Normally, I'd dive back into work, but today I just stood there, staring at the city. My name was on none of those headlines. My face was never in those magazine spreads, but my fingerprints were everywhere. I was the invisible architect. I pulled out my tablet and opened the shared company drive. Every file, every proposal I'd authored was stored under Preston's folder. His name, my work, and nobody cared enough to notice the difference. Then I saw something else. A memo from legal about restructuring leadership titles. The document listed Preston as incoming CEO and me as head of special projects. A demotion dressed up as a compliment. No consultation, no signature from me, just decided. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Of course," I whispered to myself. "Why ask the girl holding the ladder if she wants to climb it?" Just then, a knock at the door. It was Catherine, my best friend since college and now one of the sharpest lawyers in Boston. She leaned against the doorframe, holding 2 coffees. "You look like someone who's about to either cry or burn something down," she said, handing me one. "Both," I replied, taking a sip. She walked over to the window beside me. "I saw the memo. Fast, aren't they? They're not even subtle," she said. "You know, you don't have to keep playing their game." Her words lingered. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, but maybe loyalty to myself meant something else entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my apartment overlooking the Charles River, watching the faint city lights ripple across the water. Usually, the steady movement calmed me. It reminded me that the world was bigger than the Holt mansion, bigger than boardrooms and power plays. But tonight, it felt like the river was taunting me, always flowing while I was stuck in place. I turned on the lamp, pulled my laptop closer, and opened the company's internal archive. For years, I had been the one who kept everything organized: contracts, drafts, negotiation notes. I wasn't just the engine of the company, I was its memory. And now I was going to use that memory for myself. One folder at a time, I began downloading every document tied to the Providence project, then every major development from the last 3 years. Email threads where Preston approved deals he hadn't even read. Meeting minutes where my name was erased and replaced with his. Drafts of strategies that were clearly written by me. I was meticulous. I labeled and timestamped everything, creating a private offline archive. If they were going to rewrite history, I'd make sure I held the original manuscript. Around midnight, Catherine called. "Are you still awake?" "Yeah," I had a feeling. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of concern. "Marlo, talk to me. What's going on?" I hesitated, then sighed. "I'm done waiting for them to notice me. I'm not fighting for a seat at their table anymore. I'm building my own." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Good, but be smart. You're walking into a war whether they know it or not." "I've been in that war my entire life," I whispered. "I just didn't know I was allowed to fight back." After we hung up, I kept working. The quiet of the apartment became a cocoon for my rage, controlled, sharpened. I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. 2 nights later, I stayed late at the office under the pretense of finishing quarterly reports. Most employees had gone home, except for the janitor humming softly down the hall. I slipped into the executive records room, a place I practically lived in during my first years back. Preston had no idea where half these files were kept. He never cared enough to learn. I pulled out physical binders from the archives, old contracts my father signed, tax shelters, international subsidiaries. My fingers brushed over embossed covers, documents that, if handled correctly, could shift power. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. My heart lurched. I killed the lights and ducked behind a shelf. The door opened. It was Preston. He was on the phone, laughing. "Yeah, it's almost done. Once Dad makes it official, she'll be boxed out completely. Special projects is basically decoration." I held my breath. He paced the room, still talking. "She's useful, sure, but she's not built to lead. Never was. Dad knows it, I know it. Everyone knows it. The girl's a worker bee, not a queen." Something inside me turned to ice. The words didn't hurt, they confirmed what I already knew. But hearing him say them out loud, so casually, like I was a footnote in his life story, that's when the fracture widened. After he left, I turned the lights back on. My hands were shaking, but my mind was razor sharp. I knew exactly what I had to do now. The next day, I met Catherine at a quiet cafe near Beacon Hill. She spread out a legal pad between us. "Walk me through everything you have." I showed her the files, the recordings, the email chains. Her eyes widened a little more with each page. "This isn't just proof," she said. "This is leverage." "That's the point," I replied. She tapped her pen against the table. "Marlo, if you move forward with this, there's no going back. Once they realize what you're doing, they'll come at you hard. Preston, your parents, maybe even the board." I met her gaze. "Then I'll be ready." For the first time, she didn't try to talk me down. Instead, she smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that recognized a storm brewing. "Okay then, let's build this properly." We spent hours outlining timelines, identifying weak spots in the company's structure, and reviewing legal ownership documents. Catherine was methodical, brilliant, and loyal in a way my family never was. When I got home that night, I stood on my balcony, staring out at the city again. But this time, I didn't feel trapped. I felt awake. A chessboard stretched out before me, and for once, I wasn't a pawn. I was finally making my first move. The boardroom smelled like fresh polish and arrogance. It was Monday morning, the kind of morning when everything looks crisp and controlled from the outside, but simmers with tension underneath. I walked in early, laptop under my arm, ready for another round of corporate theater. One by one, the board members filed in polished shoes, tailored suits, polite smiles masking sharp instincts. My parents entered last, as if the room had been waiting for them. Preston followed, his tie slightly loosened in that effortless way he liked to mimic confidence. He took the head seat as if it was already his by birthright. "Good morning, everyone," he began, tapping his pen against the table. "We have some exciting changes ahead for Holt Real Estate." I sat across from him, expression neutral. Catherine's words echoed in my mind, "Play the long game." Preston clicked the remote and a slide appeared behind him, Strategic Restructure 2025. My stomach clenched. I hadn't approved this presentation. "As we prepare for the company's expansion and eventual IPO, we need clear leadership," Preston continued. "That's why I'm announcing a new operational framework." He clicked again. My title appeared on the screen, Marlo Holt, Head of Special Projects. Beneath it, in smaller text, supporting role in strategy and development. I felt the air leave my lungs. The room buzzed with whispers. My father nodded proudly, my mother beamed. To them, this was the natural order. Preston leads, I assist. "Preston," I said evenly, "when did we decide this?" He smiled, faux innocent. "Oh, it's just a draft, Marlo. Don't be so sensitive. You'll still have your space. Special projects is important. Think of it as your corner of the sandbox." A few board members chuckled nervously. My father leaned forward. "Marlo, this is what's best for the company. Your brother has the charisma to lead. You have the discipline to support. Together, you make a great team." There it was again, the ceiling they built for me. Invisible but unbreakable, I kept my voice steady. "This company runs on results, not charisma." A beat of silence. Preston tilted his head. "And yet, here I am leading this meeting." The room erupted in polite laughter. My cheeks burned, but not from shame. This time it was something colder. I wasn't humiliated. I was calculating. After the presentation, the board broke into smaller discussions. I slipped away to my office, heart pounding but mind crystal clear. Nora closed the door behind me. "That was brutal," she said. "It was expected," I replied, pulling up my email. "What are you going to do?" I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. "I'm done playing by their rules." That afternoon, I requested a full access report from it. I framed it as a data review for the Providence project, but what I really wanted was a map, every shared file, every executive account, every blind spot they'd overlooked. As the files loaded, something unexpected popped up, a confidential memo regarding an upcoming meeting with international investors. It was addressed to Preston and my father. My name wasn't even in the CC line. The subject line read, European Expansion Control Transfer. I opened it. They were planning to shift oversight of the European branch, something I'd built from scratch, entirely under Preston's control before the IPO. My hands curled into fists. Later that evening, my father called me into his office. Dark wood, cigar smoke, the same intimidating space I'd grown up fearing. He sat behind the massive desk, Preston lounging in the chair beside him like a prince awaiting coronation. "Marlo," my father began, "you've been invaluable to this company, but moving forward, we need a single, unified face for leadership. Investors respond to strength. Preston provides that. You'll support him." I met his eyes. "You mean I'll do the work and he'll take the credit?" His expression hardened. "Watch your tone." Preston smirked. "Come on, sis, it's not that deep. You're good at the backstage stuff. Let me handle the spotlight." I stood there, absorbing every word. For a moment, the 13-year-old girl inside me wanted to scream, to cry, to beg them to see me, but the woman I'd become didn't. She just looked at them and nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. "If that's what you want." I walked out of that office knowing exactly what I had to do. This wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about survival, about legacy, about finally drawing a line in the marble floor they'd built over me. When the elevator doors closed behind me, I exhaled slowly. No more hesitating, no more waiting for permission. The game had started. The first thing I did the next morning was walk into the office like nothing had happened. Same tailored suit, same calm smile, same good morning nods to the security guards. If anyone expected me to crumble after yesterday's announcement, they clearly hadn't been paying attention all these years. I'd spent my entire life swallowing humiliation with a polite smile. I'd gotten very, very good at it, but something was different now. I wasn't swallowing it anymore. I was letting it ferment into strategy. At 7:30 a.m., the building was nearly empty. Perfect. I made my way to the top floor, executive systems. Very few people had access, but I was one of them. When I'd first joined the company, Preston didn't care about operational systems. He found them boring. I, on the other hand, had personally overseen the digitization of decades of old contracts, financial statements, subsidiary records. That made me invisible and dangerous. I slid my keycard into the panel and stepped inside. Rows of server cabinets hummed like quiet conspirators. On the far wall, 3 secured terminals controlled permissions across the company's internal network. Preston had no idea these even existed. My father probably didn't remember they did. I'd made sure of that. I sat down at the terminal, typed my credentials, and pulled up the access control matrix. My name was buried in the lower admin list, technically support, but with quiet privileges I'd built for myself over time. They'd underestimated me so much, they didn't even bother revoking them after demoting me. "Let's fix that," I whispered. Within 30 minutes, I created a mirror account under a benign project alias, Urban Planning Intern. To anyone scanning the system, it looked like a shared folder for interns. In reality, it granted me read-only access to every internal server, including Preston's private folder. He'd never notice. He barely opened his own files without assistance. I didn't change anything. Not yet. Changing things leaves fingerprints, but I started copying. Quietly, methodically. By the time the rest of the office buzzed awake, I was back at my desk on the 28th floor, sipping coffee like any other day. Nora came in, waving a stack of papers. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Preston's set up a leadership offsite for senior execs this weekend. Guess who's not invited?" "Let me guess," I said flatly. She dropped the invitation on my desk. My name wasn't on it. I laughed, not bitterly, but sharply. "Of course, they're tightening the circle." Nora hesitated. "Marlo, what are you going to do?" I looked at her. She'd been loyal for years, quietly supportive when no one else was, but what I was about to do wasn't something I could involve her in. "Nothing," I said smoothly. "Just my job." She didn't believe me, but she nodded anyway. That afternoon, I met Catherine at her firm's downtown office. She always booked the same conference room, corner view, soundproof walls, whiteboard already filled with legal shorthand. She poured us both coffee and leaned back in her chair. "You look terrifyingly calm," she said, which usually means you're either about to do something brilliant or illegal. "Maybe both," I said, smiling faintly. I laid out the access structure I'd just created. She raised an eyebrow. "Jesus, Marlo, you built a ghost account inside your own family's company." "They never paid attention to the details," I said. "I am the details." She leaned forward. "So what's the play?" "I'm not going to burn the house down," I replied. "I'm going to quietly start removing the floorboards beneath their feet. When they fall, it'll look like gravity did it, not me." Catherine grinned. "That's more like it." We shifted to ownership structures. Years ago, my father had transferred a small but significant portion of shares into my name to avoid certain taxes during European expansion. At the time, he treated it like a formality, just numbers on paper. But legally, that 20% made me the second largest stakeholder in Holt Real Estate, ahead of Preston. He had voting power, I had legal ownership. Catherine pulled up the original documents. "They can't revoke this without your consent," she said. "And since you've been quietly signing renewals every year, they've essentially ignored this clause. That's a gold mine." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Exactly. Preston has power because they treat him like he does. I have power because I actually do." Back at the office, I received a calendar invite from my father. "Leadership transition meeting, Friday 9 a.m. Preston had CC'd all the senior board members except me. I wasn't supposed to see it. But thanks to my intern, I did. I stared at the invite for a long moment. My heart beat a little faster, not out of fear, but excitement. This was the kind of arrogance that made empires crumble from the inside. I drafted a quick note to Catherine, Friday morning, they're making it official. Catherine, good, let them. It's easier to topple a throne once the crown's visible. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my private archive. Hundreds of documents now sat neatly sorted. Emails where Preston forged approval chains. Internal notes where my father skirted governance rules. Deals in Europe that I had negotiated but Preston had taken credit for. I scrolled through them like flipping through old scars. But this time, each scar was a weapon. I thought about my 13-year-old self standing outside my father's office with that first contract in hand, waiting for someone to say, well done. She never got it, she never would. But the woman I am now, she doesn't need their applause. She needs justice. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the empty room, it starts now. Friday mornings at Holt Real Estate were usually predictable. Coffee, board chatter, Preston bragging about something he didn't understand. But that Friday had a different pulse. It wasn't just another meeting, it was the meeting. The one where Preston would be officially positioned as the future face of the company. I arrived early, not too early to look desperate, but early enough to watch them come in. One by one, the senior executives filed into the boardroom, adjusting ties, checking phones, exchanging empty smiles. My father came in last, with Preston right behind him, carrying himself like he'd already been crowned. Morning, Preston said to the room, in that faux-friendly tone he used when he wanted to assert dominance. Big day today. I sat near the middle of the table, not the head, not the back, strategically invisible. The meeting started with the usual financial updates, Q2 projections, market trends, European expansion. I kept quiet, taking notes, observing. Preston's section came next. He stood at the head of the table, flicking through slides he barely understood. As we move into this next phase, he said, hands gesturing like a motivational speaker, leadership alignment is critical. Investors need a single vision, and that vision starts here. He pointed to himself. I wanted to laugh. But instead, I glanced at my laptop and pulled up a file from my secret archive. A specific contract Preston had approved last quarter without realizing it contained a zoning discrepancy. A small mistake, but enough to cause embarrassment if brought up publicly. I waited. Preston shifted to discussing the Providence development timeline. Perfect. Preston, I interrupted casually, raising my hand like I was asking a simple question. Could you clarify the zoning revision on Parcel 14B, the one you approved last quarter? I just want to make sure it's aligned with the updated municipal codes. The room fell quiet for a beat. Preston blinked. Yeah, of course. I tilted my head. Because the new code requires mixed-use compliance, and the original contract didn't have that clause, unless you revised it. I could practically see the gears grinding in his head. He hadn't revised anything. He didn't even know what clause I was talking about. One of the senior board members, Mr. McGregor, leaned forward. Preston, did you account for the code changes? That could affect the timeline significantly. Preston forced a smile. Of course I did. I'll have legal send over the final draft. Good, I said lightly, because if not, the entire approval could get delayed 6 months. I'm sure you handled it. I smiled sweetly and went back to my laptop. The damage was subtle but immediate. A ripple of doubt moved around the table. Board members exchanged quick glances. For years, Preston's authority had gone unquestioned in those rooms. This was the first tiny crack. After the meeting, Preston stormed into my office and slammed the door. What the hell was that? He hissed. I didn't even look up from my screen. A question. Don't play dumb with me, Marlo. You tried to make me look incompetent in front of the board. I leaned back in my chair slowly, meeting his glare with a calm that made him angrier. I didn't try. You did that yourself by not knowing your own contracts. His jaw clenched. You think you're smarter than me. I know I work harder than you, I said evenly, and that's why you're terrified. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Watch yourself. Dad's not going to let you pull this crap. I stood up, closing the distance between us. Then maybe Dad should stop underestimating the person who built half this empire while his golden boy was golfing in Montauk. For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw the flicker of insecurity buried under all that bravado. Then he straightened his shoulders, smirked, and walked out. You're going to regret this. I watched him leave. No, I whispered. You will. Later that afternoon, I met Catherine at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. She ordered us martinis and leaned in. That zoning question, chef's kiss. You didn't swing the sword, you just nudged it off the table. I just reminded them who actually knows how the company runs, I said. She laughed. Careful. If you keep that up, they'll either start respecting you or start plotting. They're already plotting, I replied. I'm just finally playing too. We talked through next steps. Catherine suggested I plant a breadcrumb, something innocuous but traceable, to see if Preston or my father would try to sideline me more aggressively. It wasn't about making a big move yet. It was about drawing them out. Over the weekend, I created a draft proposal for a sustainability integration plan in our European branches. It was a legitimate idea, but not urgent, exactly the kind of thing Preston would try to steal to look visionary. I uploaded it to a shared folder with my intern account attached, ensuring every click would be tracked. On Monday morning, I got the notification I'd been waiting for. Preston had downloaded it at 2:17 a.m. and then, 30 minutes later, a calendar invite went out for a leadership vision presentation the following week with my father and the European investors in attendance. Guess who was listed as the presenter? Preston. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Hook, line, and sinker. This wasn't just about catching him stealing my work again. This was about setting up a legal trail. If I timed it right, I could prove intellectual misappropriation within the company itself, and in a family business, that was dynamite. I typed a quick message to Catherine. He took the bait. Catherine, good, let him build his stage. You'll decide when the curtain drops. That night, as I walked through the quiet streets of Boston, the autumn air biting at my cheeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the kind handed to you by your last name, but the kind you carve out quietly, piece by piece. Preston thought he was playing checkers. I was playing chess, and I'd just moved my first rook. By Tuesday morning, the tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Whispers trailed me through the corridors, executives exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking, assistants abruptly stopping conversations as I walked by. It wasn't paranoia. I'd grown up in this world. Power shifts didn't happen loudly, they started with quiet murmurs in hallways. Around 10:00 a.m., Nora burst into my office, slightly breathless. They're in your father's private conference room. Your parents, Preston, some of the board, closed doors. No calendar invite. No minutes being taken. Good, I said, calmly closing my laptop. That means I got under their skin. Nora hesitated. Do you want me to try to listen in? I shook my head. No, if they're panicking, let them talk. They'll make mistakes. But the truth was, I didn't need to eavesdrop. Thanks to the intern account I'd created, I could see Preston's shared folder activity in real time. 5 minutes after Nora left, a new document popped up. Leadership Stabilization Plan, Draft. I opened it. My stomach tightened, though my face stayed still. The document laid out a strategic transition where I'd be moved to a non-operational advisory role, essentially locking me out of decision-making. They called it honoring her contributions while allowing Preston to lead decisively. A neat way of saying push her out without triggering legal trouble. I scrolled further. They'd already drafted a press statement, complete with my gracious quote, thanking the company for allowing me to focus on my passions. They were writing my exit speech for me. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a soft laugh. Impressive, I whispered. They're moving fast. That afternoon, Preston appeared at my office door with that same smug, performative kindness he always used before dropping a bomb. Sis, he said, strolling in like he owned the place. Got a minute? I'm working, I replied without looking up. This won't take long. He closed the door behind him. Dad and I had a great talk with the board this morning. We think it's time you took a step back from day-to-day operations. You've done great work, but it's time for you to focus on what you're good at. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet his. And what's that, Preston? He smiled. Support. The word landed like a slap. But instead of reacting, I tilted my head and smiled faintly. So this is the part where you tell me it's for my own good, right? That I should be grateful you're protecting me from the big scary responsibilities. His smirk faltered for half a second. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, Preston, I said evenly. I'm just not playing dumb anymore. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Dad's going to make the announcement soon. You can either go along gracefully or make this ugly. But let's be clear, if you fight this, you're going to lose. I stood up slowly, walking toward him until we were inches apart. We'll see. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, not fear exactly, but uncertainty. Then he scoffed and left. After he was gone, I picked up my phone and called Catherine. She answered on the first ring. Tell me, she said. They're moving to box me out, I replied. Fast, drafts, press statements, everything. She swore softly under her breath. They're trying to corner you before you can react. Classic power grab. I'm not panicking, I said. I'm documenting. Good, here. What we're going to do, she said. Her tone shifted into lawyer mode, precise, calm, surgical. You need to quietly shore up your legal footing. First, make sure all your shareholder agreements are up to date. No unsigned renewals, no gaps they can exploit. Second, we'll start building a paper trail of your operational contributions, emails, approvals, strategies, everything that proves you run this company. Already started, I said. She laughed softly. Of course you have. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in plain sight. I attended meetings, smiled at board members, congratulated Preston on his vision, and quietly collected everything. Every contract I'd authored, every email I'd sent to government regulators, every strategic deck Preston had stolen, I archived it all into a secure offline drive. Meanwhile, Catherine introduced me to a forensic accountant she trusted. His name was Thomas, a quiet man with sharp eyes. He once worked for Holt Real Estate before being fired by Preston for asking too many questions. He shook my hand firmly when we met in Catherine's office. I never thought I'd be back in this world, he said. Consider it unfinished business, I replied. Thomas had something I didn't, an intimate understanding of the company's financial underbelly. He could trace where money moved when people thought no one was watching. He pulled out his laptop. If they're planning to force you out, they might also be cleaning the books to consolidate power. I'll find the weak spots. You decide how to use them. Perfect, I said. By Thursday, I had my first real piece of intel. Thomas found a series of quiet wire transfers from the European branch to a shell company tied to Preston's golf buddy, masked as consulting fees. It wasn't illegal on its face, but it reeked of something bigger. I stared at the printouts Thomas handed me. This is good, I said slowly. Not enough to blow them up yet, but enough to let them know I see them if I want to, Catherine grinned. The board's underestimating you. Preston's panicking. Your parents are circling the wagons. Keep going exactly like this. I nodded. I'm not going to swing yet. I'm going to let them think I'm cornered. That's when people make their sloppiest moves. That night, I walked into my father's study unannounced. He was alone, reading a report. Arlo, he said without looking up, you should knock. I grew up in this house. I don't need permission, I said. He finally met my gaze. Your brother tells me you're not being cooperative. I smiled. I'm just listening. You've had a good run, he said, but the future belongs to Preston. You need to accept that. Don't embarrass yourself or us. The weight of those words used to crush me. Now they just clarified things. He would never see me as more than a shadow, and I no longer needed his light. I stepped closer. You've always underestimated me. That's your mistake, not mine. Then I turned and left, leaving him staring after me in silence. Outside, the night air was crisp. I exhaled slowly, feeling that cold determination settled deeper into my bones. They thought they were tightening the noose. What they didn't realize was that I was the one holding the other end of the rope. The first signs of Preston's counterattack came through whispers. A few mid-level managers stopped making eye contact in the hallway. Meetings that usually included me were suddenly postponed or limited to essential personnel. I wasn't surprised. When someone like Preston feels threatened, he doesn't confront you directly. He spreads rot in the walls. On Wednesday morning, I walked into the break room and caught two marketing executives whispering. The moment they saw me, they froze like guilty teenagers. One of them forced a smile. Morning, Ms. Holt. Morning, I replied lightly, grabbing my coffee. I didn't need to interrogate them. The way they avoided my eyes told me everything. Preston was working on perception. If he couldn't remove me legally yet, he'd weaken my reputation until the board saw me as volatile, unreliable, or irrelevant. By noon, the rumor had reached me through Nora. They're saying you're planning to resign, she said, shutting the office door behind her. That you're emotionally unstable after the transition. I almost laughed. Of course they are. Classic misdirection. Paint me as weak before I can make a move. She looked worried. Some people are buying it. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the coffee in my mug. Then it's time I reminded them who actually runs this place. That afternoon, I pulled up the employee network and drafted a company-wide memo under my operational title. It was short, professional, and surgical, a reminder that all European project approvals would still go through my department until final legal transition. Nothing in it was false, but the wording made it clear that I was still at the center of the machine. Within an hour, I started receiving quiet nods in the hallway. A few department heads forwarded me updates on ongoing deals, bypassing Preston's team entirely. I wasn't fighting Preston's gossip with gossip. I was fighting it with competence. The next day, Catherine called with news. "They're moving on the PR front," she said. "Preston just leaked to a friendly journalist that you're considering taking a step back to pursue philanthropy." I stared out the window of my office. "He's trying to write my legacy before I'm gone." "Do you want to respond publicly?" she asked. "No, if I deny it, I validate it. Let him think he's controlling the story. We'll show the board proof, not panic." That afternoon, Thomas showed up with a new set of findings. He traced the consulting shell company to a private account Preston shared with one of his fraternity brothers. The transfers were messy, inconsistent, and amateurish. Thomas explained that if Preston tried to present himself as a strong financial leader, one good audit would crumble that image. "This is the kind of thing that doesn't take them down immediately," Thomas said, sliding the printouts toward me. "But if he steps into the spotlight, this becomes a landmine." "Good," I said quietly. "Let him walk right onto it." Meanwhile, I started shoring up allies. Over the years, there were people in the company who saw me clearly even when my family didn't. Quiet operators, project managers, senior analysts, compliance officers, people who valued competence over theatrics. I took lunches with them, coffee breaks, casual hallway chats that were anything but casual. I didn't ask them to pick a side. I simply reminded them who made their jobs easier, who answered their emails at midnight, who caught mistakes before they exploded. People remember that kind of thing. By Friday, I noticed a shift. It was subtle but real. When Preston walked into a meeting, people looked at him because he had the title. When I walked in, they leaned in because I had the answers. Influence is rarely loud at first. It's quiet, and then it's everywhere. Preston noticed too. Barged into my office just before lunch, fake smile plastered on his face. "You're awfully busy for someone who's supposedly stepping down." I swiveled my chair slowly to face him. "I don't recall stepping down. Did I miss a memo?" His smile tightened. "The board's getting tired of your attitude. You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm working," I said simply. "Something you might want to try." His facade cracked for a second. "Keep playing your little games. In the end, Dad's word is law." "And he's with me?" I stood up, meeting his gaze. "For now." He blinked. I didn't elaborate, let him stew in that silence. Later that evening, I met Catherine and Thomas at her office. We went over everything we had so far. Catherine outlined a timeline for what she called a strategic strike, exposed Preston's incompetence and shady dealings not all at once but in phases. First, internal credibility. Then, investor confidence. Finally, legal positioning. Thomas added that the upcoming leadership presentation Preston had scheduled with the European investors would be the perfect opportunity. "He's going to use your sustainability proposal," Thomas said. "You can prove it's yours and catch him lying on record." Catherine nodded. "And if he fumbles even a single financial detail, we bring out the consulting shell transfers. Clean, timed, undeniable." I exhaled slowly. It's not just about humiliating him. It's about making it impossible for the board to keep pretending he's the answer. Catherine leaned forward. "And when that happens, Marlowe, they'll have nowhere else to turn but you." I walked home under the city lights that night, my heels clicking against the pavement in a steady rhythm. For years, I'd walked through this city feeling invisible despite everything I'd accomplished. But now, with every step, the weight was shifting. Preston thought this was a sprint. He was wrong. This was a long game. And I had just taken control of the board. The morning of the investor presentation arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, sipping black coffee, watching the city stir awake below. Boston mornings always had that quiet hum before the rush. Usually that hum centered me. Today, it sharpened me. Everything had led to this day. Preston had spent the entire week rehearsing his big vision speech for the European investors. Everyone in the building knew he was gunning for this moment, the first time he'd stand before foreign stakeholders as the official heir apparent. The meeting wasn't just symbolic. If he impressed them, the board would see him as the undeniable face of Holt's expansion. If he stumbled, cracks would start to spread where the cameras couldn't see. And he was walking into the room with my proposal. I walked down to the 35th floor executive boardroom 5 minutes before the meeting. The atmosphere was buzzing. Catering staff arranged silver trays of pastries and espresso shots for the investors. Translation earpieces were lined neatly at each seat. A massive screen displayed Preston's opening slide, Holt Real Estate, a sustainable global vision. I took my seat near the middle, not in the spotlight, but close enough to watch every move. My father entered with that authoritative calm he always wore like armor. Preston followed a step behind, shaking hands, laughing a little too loudly. He looked polished, confident, rehearsed, but I could see the tension in the way his fingers fidgeted with his cufflinks. The European investors arrived shortly after, a mix of sharp-suited men and women with eyes that missed nothing. I'd worked with many of them over the past 2 years. They respected results, not speeches. That was my advantage. The lights dimmed slightly as Preston stepped up to the podium. "Good morning," he began, projecting his voice with practiced charm. "Today, I'm excited to share Holt Real Estate's vision for a sustainable and globally integrated future." He launched into my proposal as if it were his brainchild. Slide after slide displayed my work, my models, my projections, my phased development strategy for Europe. I'd spent months building that plan. He'd spent one night copying it. The investors listened politely, nodding occasionally. But as the presentation went on, I noticed subtle shifts. A furrowed brow here, a whispered translation there. Preston's delivery was smooth, but when it came to details, he stumbled. Halfway through, one of the investors, a woman named Elise from Zurich whom I'd worked closely with, raised her hand. "Mr. Holt," she said in crisp English, "can you explain how the revised zoning policies in Germany affect your Q3 timeline?" I almost smiled. It was a question I had anticipated weeks ago. Preston hesitated. "Of course," he said. "We've adjusted accordingly to maintain schedule." Elise narrowed her eyes. "Adjusted how?" He clicked to the next slide as if it would save him. It didn't. I spoke up from my seat, tone measured. "If I may," I said. All heads turned. The zoning revisions were accounted for by restructuring the phased implementation. Specifically, we prioritized the mixed-use sectors first to secure early approvals. That allows us to maintain the Q3 timeline despite regulatory shifts. Elise nodded approvingly. "Exactly what I hoped to hear. Thank you, Ms. Holt." My father shot me a sharp look. Preston forced a laugh. "Yes, that's what I meant, of course. Thank you, Marlowe, for the clarification." The investors chuckled lightly, but I saw it, the first fissure. As the presentation went on, the cracks widened. Another investor asked about financing mechanisms for the sustainability initiative. Preston gave a vague answer. I calmly supplemented with specifics, citing clauses, partnerships, and projected ROI numbers. By the third time I'd clarified something, the room wasn't looking at Preston anymore. They were looking at me. Preston's confident facade began to slip. He fumbled transitions, his smile strained. At one point, he glanced toward my father for reassurance, but Richard's expression had hardened. This was not the flawless coronation he'd envisioned. Then came the final slide. Preston tried to close strong. "At Holt Real Estate, our vision is unified, decisive, and forward-thinking. I'm honored to lead this next chapter." Before anyone could applaud, Elise spoke again. "Mr. Holt, your proposal is impressive, but I do have one question. This document," she tapped her printed copy, "lists Ms. Marlowe Holt as the lead author. Could you clarify the division of responsibilities between you two?" The silence in the room was electric. Preston blinked rapidly. "Well, Marlowe contributed to the technical aspects, but the overall vision, I wrote it," I said clearly, cutting him off. "Every page." The investors exchanged looks. Elise smiled faintly. "I thought so." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was devastating. Preston's credibility cracked in front of the very people he needed most. After the presentation ended, polite applause filled the room. Investors approached me first, shaking my hand, asking follow-up questions. Preston stood to the side, trying to salvage small talk with whoever lingered, but most didn't. When the last investor left, my father closed the door and turned to Preston. His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. "What the hell was that?" Preston tried to deflect. "She kept interrupting me." "She saved you," Richard snapped. "And everyone saw it." I stayed quiet, standing near the window, watching their reflection in the glass. Richard's tone turned icy. "If you can't handle basic details, how do you expect investors to trust you with expansion?" Preston looked at me like I'd stabbed him in the back. I met his gaze calmly. "You stole my work. All I did was tell the truth." He clenched his fists. "You made me look weak." "No, Preston," I said softly. "You did that all by yourself." He stormed out. My father stared at me for a long moment before saying, "You're playing a dangerous game." I met his eyes without flinching. "No. I'm finally playing." When I returned to my office, my phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Catherine, the investors are already talking. You shifted the balance today." "Me? Good. This is just the beginning." As the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the glass towers gold, I realized something profound. For years, I'd been fighting to be seen. Now, I didn't need their permission anymore. I was taking the throne they thought they'd built for him. The fallout from the investor meeting didn't take long to hit. By the next morning, The entire top floor of Holt Real Estate buzzed like a disturbed hive. Preston's stumble had been quiet enough to avoid public scandal, but loud enough for every senior executive to hear through the walls. In a company like ours, perception traveled faster than truth. I walked into the building to find people greeting me differently, not with surprise or pity anymore, but with measured respect. Heads of departments nodded as I passed. One even whispered, "Nice work yesterday." It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Power shifts don't happen with declarations, they happen with a change in how people look at you. Preston arrived late that morning, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky, pretending he hadn't just humiliated himself in front of key investors. He breezed past my office without looking in, jaw set. A few minutes later, Nora forwarded me a calendar invite labeled Emergency Leadership Session, Holt family only. No executives, no board, just blood. I didn't need to be told what that meant. Richard was circling the wagons. When I entered the conference room, my parents were already seated at the far end of the table. Preston slouched beside my father, arms crossed, radiating resentment. My mother smiled that practiced social smile that had never once meant warmth. Richard's tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Let's address what happened yesterday," he said. "Preston, that was unacceptable. Investors left with more faith in Marlowe than in you." Preston bristled. "She undermined me on purpose." I folded my hands on the table. "I answered direct questions. You couldn't." He slammed his palm down. "You made me look like I didn't know my own plan." "Because you didn't," I replied evenly. My mother intervened. "Enough. This bickering isn't helping anyone. We're family. We need to present unity." Richard leaned back in his chair, watching us both like a general assessing two soldiers. "Perception matters. Preston, you need to rebuild confidence immediately. Marlowe, stop acting like you're competing with your brother. This company has one leader and it's him." It was the same line I'd heard my entire life. This time, it didn't sting. It just solidified something inside me. I looked him in the eye. "Then maybe he should start leading." A dangerous silence followed. Richard's expression hardened. "You're playing with fire." "I'm just not pretending it's warm anymore," I said. Richard ended the meeting abruptly. "Both of you, enough games, will manage perception internally. Preston, tighten your team. Marlowe, stay in your lane." I stood up slowly. "My lane built the road you're driving on." Preston muttered something under his breath as I left. I didn't care what it was. The real meeting had already happened. Richard made it clear he'd double down to protect Preston's image. That meant one thing: he would tighten control, and I would have to hit where control hurts most: money. Catherine came to my apartment that evening, a bottle of wine in one hand and her laptop in the other. She kicked off her heels the moment she entered. "I heard about the family drama," she said. "How bad?" Richard, digging in. "Preston's wounded but not out. They'll try to consolidate power through finances. It's the only thing that gives Richard leverage." She poured us each a glass. "Then we hit back financially." Thomas joined us via video call, files already pulled up. "I've been digging deeper into those shell companies. It's worse than I thought. Preston's been routing consulting fees through at least 3 intermediaries. It's sloppy, but it's not small. We're talking millions." My pulse quickened, not from shock, but from the clarity of opportunity. "Is it provable?" Thomas adjusted his glasses. "Absolutely. The paper trail is a mess. If this goes to auditors or investors, he's finished." Catherine leaned forward. "But we don't go public yet. We use it like a loaded gun. Quietly. Make them think they're still in control until the moment we pull the trigger." I nodded slowly. "We destabilize their financial shield, brick by brick." The next day, I requested access to updated European budget reports under the guise of operational oversight. The finance department didn't question it. They were used to me being thorough. While Preston was busy repairing his bruised ego with flashy team-building events, I traced cash flows like threads in a tapestry. Every path led to the same hidden accounts. By Thursday, I had compiled a clean, chronological ledger. It wasn't just evidence of shady accounting. It painted a story of incompetence. Preston wasn't clever. He was reckless. I handed the file to Catherine. She flipped through the pages, her smile growing colder with each turn. "This isn't just leverage. This is a detonator." She suggested our next move: plant subtle questions in the board's finance committee. Not accusations, just enough to make them curious. People in power often ignore direct attacks, but a whisper of doubt can eat away at trust faster than a sledgehammer. Friday morning, a finance committee member stopped me in the hallway. "Marlowe," he said cautiously, "I came across some odd transactions in the European accounts. Are you aware of these consulting fees?" I gave him a perfectly measured expression. "I've noticed them too. I'm sure Preston has a brilliant explanation. The way he frowned told me everything. The seed was planted. That evening, Preston tried a different tactic. He barged into my office, leaning against my desk like a man trying to reclaim ground he didn't own. "I know what you're doing," he said. "Then you should probably stop giving me so much material," I replied calmly. His jaw tightened. "You think you're smarter than everyone, but you're just setting yourself up for a fall. Dad will never side with you, ever." "I don't need him to," I said. He stared at me for a moment, searching for the fear he'd always found in me before. This time, he didn't find it. As he stormed out, I turned off my office lights and watched the city skyline burn orange with the sunset. They thought this was still a family drama. They hadn't realized it was becoming a corporate war. And in war, control of the money decides who wins. I was closer than they thought. The week after the investor meeting marked a shift in tone. Preston had stopped trying to posture in front of me. Now, he moved in shadows. Whispers began surfacing in departments I rarely interacted with. Someone had circulated an anonymous memo claiming I misused company resources for personal gain. The language was clumsy but strategic, enough to stir suspicion without providing anything concrete. Nora brought me the memo first. She stood by my office door, voice low. "People are talking. Preston's team is saying you diverted funds from a European pilot project to a private foundation. They're saying the board's quietly investigating." I took the memo from her hands. The accusations were vague, just specific enough to sound plausible. "Classic Preston," I said. "When he can't win with competence, he tries to bury you under whispers." She looked uneasy. "Some of the newer staff are believing it." I leaned back in my chair, tapping the edge of the paper. "Then it's time I remind them what happens when they try to play my game." That afternoon, I walked down to the finance floor myself. Normally, I sent emails or scheduled formal reviews, but today I wanted visibility. My heels echoed down the hall as analysts glanced up from their desks. I asked for the ledgers tied to the European pilot projects, the ones Preston's team claimed I had diverted. The finance head, an older man named Robson who'd been with Holt for 3 decades, handed me the files personally. "Is there an issue?" he asked. "Apparently there's a rumor," I said evenly. "So I'm checking for myself." Within 20 minutes, I'd found the supposed diversion. It wasn't mine. It was Preston's own authorization, rerouted through a consulting intermediary he'd used before. Someone in his circle had deliberately mislabeled the transaction to make it trace back to my department. It was sloppy, but dangerous if no one checked. I smiled faintly. "Got you." Instead of confronting him directly, I walked the files over to Robson. "I think you'll find this interesting," I said, pointing at the authorization code. "That's Preston's. He signed it 3 months ago." Robson frowned. "I remember this. He pushed it through without a standard audit." "Good," I said. "Because the rumor floating around is that I did it. I wanted you to see the truth before anyone else did." Robson wasn't a gossip. He was a gatekeeper, and gatekeepers are powerful when doubt creeps in. By the next morning, whispers had reversed direction. The same people who'd eyed me with suspicion were now side-eyeing Preston. I didn't have to say a word. The numbers did it for me, but Preston wasn't done. Later that day, Nora burst into my office, cheeks flushed. "They're setting you up," she said in a rush. "I overheard one of Preston's assistants talking in the copy room. They're planning to leak a fake email from your account to make it look like you offered to sell internal reports to a competitor." I felt a flicker of anger, but it was immediately replaced by cold clarity. When? Soon, they were bragging about how it'll make the board panic. "Good," I said, standing up. "Let them try." That evening, I stayed late at the office. Alone, I accessed the security logs. Thanks to my hidden intern account, I could see exactly who was doing what in the network. Within 2 hours, I found the activity. Someone from Preston's executive assistant team had logged into my email archive through a spoofed admin account. They weren't subtle. I set a trap. I created a decoy folder in my account labeled External Partnership Drafts and filled it with fabricated but plausible-looking messages discussing a non-existent deal with a fictional company. At the bottom of one draft, I added a single, deliberate typo in a legal term, a telltale signature I could trace if it was leaked. 2 days later, the board received an anonymous tip that I'd been emailing competitor firms. The attached message was one of my decoys, typo and all. Richard called an emergency family meeting. When I entered the room, Preston looked too relaxed. My father slid the printed email across the table. "Explain this." I picked it up, glanced at it, and almost laughed. "You might want to tell your son to pick better forgers," I said calmly. Richard's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I pointed at the typo in the document. That typo doesn't exist in any legitimate legal draft. But it does exist in a decoy folder I created after suspicious network activity appeared on my account. It confirmed the login came from an assistant under Preston's authorization. The silence that followed was sharp. Preston's face flushed red. "She's lying," he blurted. I met Richard's gaze steadily. "Check the logs." Richard didn't say a word, but he gestured to his chief of security, who was standing in the corner. The man nodded and left. The atmosphere in the room shifted like a sudden drop in temperature. Preston's smugness evaporated. When the meeting ended, Richard didn't scold me. He didn't praise me either. He just said, "This family is tearing itself apart." I answered softly, "No, you're just seeing what's been there all along." Preston stormed out again, furious and exposed. His forgery attempt hadn't just failed, it had shown the board's inner circle how reckless he could be. Catherine called me later that night. "I heard about the email stunt. You handled that like a scalpel." "He handed me the knife," I said. Thomas chimed in from the same call. "And the board, they're starting to ask questions about Preston. Quietly. They're not siding with you yet, but they're not blindly following him anymore either." I sat on my balcony, city lights blinking below, a glass of wine in hand. For the first time, I felt the shift not just in the company, but in the family. Preston wasn't just fumbling anymore. He was unraveling, and I hadn't even played my strongest card yet. I tilted my head back and let the cool night air wash over me. This wasn't a game of strength. It was a game of precision, and I was winning it move by move. The morning after the forged email debacle, the air in the building felt different. It wasn't overt, no one said anything out loud, but people looked at Preston differently. Conversations hushed when he walked past. Executives who normally hovered near him kept a polite distance. In the corporate world, silence can be louder than scandal. Preston arrived with that familiar forced confidence, sunglasses tucked into his shirt like a man pretending he hadn't just been caught setting a trap. But behind his eyes was something new, panic, tightly wrapped in arrogance. He tried to corner me outside the elevator. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. I stepped closer until our eyes were level. "No," I said quietly. "I know I am." He clenched his jaw and stormed off, muttering something under his breath. Later that morning, Richard called a private meeting with both of us in his office. The walls were lined with decades of framed deals, newspaper clippings, and family photos that painted the illusion of unity. Richard sat behind his massive mahogany desk, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. He started with Preston. "Do you have any explanation for the IT findings?" Preston tried his usual bravado. "Someone on my team must have acted without my knowledge. I'll handle it." Richard's voice was cold. "You authorized the assistant's credentials. Don't insult me." For the first time, I saw something crack in Preston's composure. He stammered. Richard leaned back, eyes narrowing. "I trusted you with the company's reputation, and you pulled a stunt like this?" Preston pointed at me. "She's trying to make me look incompetent." I stayed calm. "You don't need my help for that." Richard shot me a warning glance. "Enough. This infighting ends now. If either of you pulls something like this again, I'll..." He stopped, realizing how hollow the threat sounded. He'd lost control of the narrative, and we all knew it. The meeting ended with no resolution. Preston left fuming, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Richard stayed seated, staring out the window. I stood for a moment before quietly leaving. He didn't stop me. That evening, Catherine and I met at her firm. Thomas joined via video call, charts and ledgers already pulled up on the screen. Catherine cut to the chase. "They're fractured. Preston's credibility is bleeding out, and Richard's starting to doubt him. This is the window we've been waiting for." Thomas zoomed in on a cluster of transactions. "These are the consulting payments Preston authorized through the shell companies. I've traced them back to 3 fake vendors, all linked to one trust account in Luxembourg. And guess who's listed as the primary beneficiary?" I leaned forward. "Preston," Thomas nodded. "Exactly, it's not just sloppy, it's potentially criminal. If the board or regulators see this, it's over for him." Catherine's tone was razor sharp. "We don't reveal it all at once. We pick the perfect moment, one where the fallout hits hardest. That's how you win." I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it settle. "Then we start tightening the net." The first step was subtle. Thomas drafted a series of routine financial inquiries to the audit department, signed under my operational title. Nothing accusatory, just enough to make the auditors pull records. The moment they did, the inconsistencies would speak louder than anything I could say. Next, Catherine quietly reached out to a trusted board member known for her strict ethics, an older woman named Judith, who'd seen the company through multiple crises. Catherine didn't reveal the evidence outright. She simply told Judith there were irregularities worth a closer look. People like Judith don't gossip, they investigate. Meanwhile, I focused on strengthening my alliances inside. Department heads, project leads, compliance officers, they'd all watched Preston's antics with increasing discomfort. I gave them competence, stability, clarity. While he raged, I built. By midweek, the first tremors began. The audit department sent out a request for documentation regarding Preston's European consulting contracts. His assistant accidentally forwarded the email chain to me. The panic in her follow-up message was almost poetic. Catherine called that night, a grin in her voice. "They're biting." "Good," I said. "Let them pull the thread." On Thursday, Preston barged into my office, face flushed. "What the hell are you doing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Working. Don't play dumb with me. I know you're behind this audit nonsense." "I didn't start anything," I replied smoothly. "I just asked a few questions. If that makes you nervous, maybe you should look at your own paperwork." He slammed his fist on my desk. "You're going to regret this." I stood slowly, meeting him eye to eye. "No, Preston, you are." He stormed out again, but this time I saw fear beneath the fury. That weekend, I received an unexpected call from Judith, the board member Catherine had spoken to. Her voice was calm but serious. "Marlo, I've reviewed some of the preliminary audit documents. There are serious issues here. If this comes to the full board, there will be consequences." I didn't play coy. "I trust you'll do what's right." "I always do," she replied. After the call, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the city lights reflecting on the glass walls. This wasn't about winning a petty family argument anymore. It was about dismantling the illusion that had kept Preston untouchable for years. For so long, they'd underestimated me. But underestimation is a gift. It lets you build power in the shadows until the day you step into the light and everyone realizes it's too late to stop you. That day was approaching, and Preston had no idea just how close he was to the edge. The audit storm didn't hit all at once. It started with quiet, formal emails from the finance department. Then came document requests, then clarifications, and finally, scheduled interviews. By the end of the second week, Preston's executive floor felt like a pressure cooker. Assistants ran back and forth carrying binders. Legal counsel started camping in conference rooms. People whispered as they passed each other in hallways. The first real blow came during the audit committee's closed-door session on Tuesday morning. Preston had tried to bluff his way through the questioning, acting indignant that anyone would dare scrutinize his innovative strategy. But auditors don't respond to ego, they respond to numbers, and the numbers didn't lie. When Preston emerged from that session, his face was pale, jaw clenched. I happened to be in the hallway, intentionally reviewing files on a bench near the conference room. He stopped when he saw me. "This is your doing," he hissed. I looked up slowly. "No, Preston, this is yours." He glared at me for a long moment before storming off, but the way he stumbled slightly as he turned the corner told me the truth. He wasn't just angry, he was afraid. Catherine called later that afternoon with the update I'd been waiting for. "The auditors found the Luxembourg Trust," she said. "They're escalating to the board, Judith's leading the charge." I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight of that settle. Years of being ignored, diminished, written off, and now the truth was clawing its way into the light. On Thursday, an emergency board meeting was called. Officially, it was to discuss ongoing audit concerns. Unofficially, it was the beginning of Preston's reckoning. I arrived early, dressed sharply, every detail deliberate. Catherine walked in with me as my legal counsel, her expression cool and unreadable. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Richard sat at the head of the table, visibly tense. Preston slouched a few seats down, feigning nonchalance but gripping his pen like a lifeline. The board members filed in one by one, each carrying folders, some whispering to Judith as they took their seats. Judith opened the meeting. Her voice was calm but authoritative. "We've uncovered a series of financial irregularities tied to European consulting contracts. Funds were routed through shell companies and ultimately deposited into a Luxembourg trust. The authorization trail points to Preston Holt." Murmurs rippled through the room. Preston's eyes darted to Richard, then to me. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "I've never seen those documents in my life." Judith slid a file across the table toward him. "Your signature appears on every authorization form." He flipped through the pages, face reddening. This is taken out of context. It's part of an advanced tax strategy." The CFO cut in sharply. "Then why wasn't it disclosed to the finance committee?" Richard's voice finally broke through. "Enough. Preston, tell us the truth." For the first time in my life, I saw my father look at his son not as the heir, but as a liability. Preston stammered. I trusted the consultants. They handled everything. I didn't know. Judith's tone was ice. Negligence isn't a defense when you sign financial authorizations. The CFO continued presenting findings, one after another. Each slide was a nail in the coffin. Preston's defenses grew weaker. By the time they showed the flowchart tracing money from Holt accounts to the Luxembourg trust with his name attached, even Richard leaned back, silent and grim. Then Judith turned to me. Marlowe, as head of European operations during this period, can you speak to your involvement? I met her gaze steadily. Yes, I was aware of the European projects, but I had no involvement with those consulting firms or financial transfers. In fact, I raised concerns about unauthorized expenses months ago, but they were dismissed by senior leadership. Her eyes flicked briefly to Richard. Several board members exchanged knowing looks. Preston slammed his hand on the table. She's lying. She's trying to take my place. Judith didn't flinch. This isn't about family politics, Preston. This is about governance and trust. And then it happened. Catherine slid a folder onto the table, her movements deliberate. This, she said, is the complete ledger of the consulting payments obtained through legal channels. We're prepared to share it with regulators if necessary. Judith took the folder, scanned the first few pages, then passed it down. Each board member read it in silence. By the time it reached Richard, the room was heavy with something irreversible. Richard stared at the pages for a long time, then looked at Preston. Tell me this isn't true. Preston opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The board chair, an older man with decades in the company, cleared his throat. Given the gravity of these findings, I move to suspend Preston Holt from financial authority pending full investigation. The motion passed with only one dissenting vote, Richard. Preston looked like someone had punched the air out of his lungs. You can't do this to me, he shouted, standing up. I'm the future of this company. Judith's gaze was steel. The future earns its place, Preston. It doesn't steal it. He turned to me, eyes blazing. You did this. I didn't deny it, I just held his gaze. I told the truth. Richard didn't defend him, he didn't look at me either. He just stared at the folder, his empire crumbling between his children. After the meeting, Catherine and I walked out into the crisp evening air. She exhaled slowly. That was the first domino. It's more than that, I said. It's the board taking back control. She nodded. And now they'll look for someone to stabilize the company. Someone who knows the systems, the strategy, the people. For the first time, the path ahead was clear. Not easy, not safe, but clear. When I got home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blur through the glass. I thought about all the years I'd watched my father choose Preston over me, all the rooms where I'd done the work and he'd taken the credit. And now, the truth was finally speaking louder than their lies. I wasn't done. But for the first time, they were the ones scrambling to catch up. The days after the board meeting were eerily quiet, not peaceful, tense like the pause before a storm breaks. Preston had been stripped of financial authority, but he still had access to his network of loyalists. That made him dangerous. Cornered men don't retreat, they lash out. I noticed the first ripple Monday morning when several department heads received urgent restructuring memos from Preston's office, instructing them to reroute project oversight away from me. He had no authority to issue such directives anymore, but a few middle managers, still fearful of the family hierarchy, obeyed out of habit. I called each of them personally. Those directives are invalid, I said calmly. Preston has been suspended from financial authority. If you follow his instructions, you'll be violating board orders. The hesitation in their voices was telling. For years, Preston had ruled through Richard's shadow. Now, without it, his commands sounded hollow. By the end of the day, every department had quietly reversed his memos. Catherine sent me a text that night. He's thrashing. Don't give him time to find footing. She was right. It was time to end this. On Wednesday morning, Richard called me into his office. He looked older than he had a month ago, less the towering patriarch, more a man forced to face the cracks in his foundation. He gestured for me to sit. They've suspended your brother, he said. Do you understand what that means? Yes, I replied evenly. It means everything we've built is in jeopardy, he snapped. Investors are nervous. Employees are divided. If this becomes public, it could destroy us. No, I said quietly. What Preston did could destroy us. What I'm doing is keeping us from sinking with him. Richard slammed his hand on the desk. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? For him to stumble so you could swoop in. I didn't flinch. No, I've been waiting for the truth to matter. For a long moment, he just stared at me, then his voice softened. You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing, to raise a son believing he'll carry it forward. I met his gaze. You raised a son you wanted. You raised a daughter who actually built it. Something flickered in his expression, pride, regret, fear. He didn't answer. That afternoon, Preston made his move. He gathered his remaining loyalists in the executive lounge and gave what one employee later described to me as a desperate pep rally. He ranted about betrayal, about corporate vultures, and how he'd take back what was his. Then he did something reckless. He tried to transfer confidential investor data to a private drive. It caught it instantly. The alert came to my desk within minutes, thanks to the shadow access I'd built months earlier. I walked into the server room myself to verify. There it was, Preston's credentials flagged for attempting to export sensitive files to an external device. It was the kind of breach that, if not stopped, could lead to legal disaster. I authorized the immediate lockdown of his accounts. Security escorted him out of the building 2 hours later. He didn't go quietly. Employees gathered in the lobby as he shouted about betrayal, about how this company was his birthright. Richard arrived mid-scene, face pale. Preston pointed at me from across the room. "She did this. She's tearing us apart?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The sight of security leading him toward the exit said everything. That night, Richard showed up at my apartment unannounced. He stood in the doorway, looking both furious and defeated. "You humiliated him," he said. "He humiliated himself," I answered. "I just stopped him from dragging the company down with him." He stepped inside, his voice low. "He's my son. And I'm your daughter," I said softly. "The one you've ignored every time I saved you from his mistakes." He didn't have a response to that. For the first time, the power dynamic between us shifted. He wasn't lecturing me anymore. He was standing in my doorway, forced to reckon with the reality he'd spent decades avoiding. Over the next few days, the board acted quickly. Preston's suspension escalated to a full internal investigation. His access was revoked. His name was removed from upcoming expansion projects. Investors, initially nervous, responded positively to the sudden burst of accountability. The European partners even sent me a private message of support. "You held the line when it mattered." Catherine and I met in her office late Friday night to review the week's events. She poured us each a drink. "You realize what you did this week, right?" she said. "I contained a liability," I replied. She shook her head. "No, you ended a dynasty's illusion. For years, everyone believed Preston was inevitable. You just proved that inevitability can be dismantled." I stared out her window at the city skyline. For so long, this fight had been about survival, proving I wasn't invisible, that my work mattered. Now it was about something bigger, the company's future, shaped by someone who actually cared about the work, not the title. Catherine raised her glass. "To precision." I clinked mine against hers. "To the end game." At that moment, I knew the war inside my family was reaching its climax. Preston wasn't gone, but his power was shattered. Richard was standing at a crossroads, and I was no longer fighting from the shadows. I was standing in the light, ready for the final act. The official notice of Preston's removal from all operational duties came on a gray Monday morning. The board issued a formal statement to investors, employees, and the press. It didn't use explosive language, just measured corporate phrasing about restructuring, internal governance review, and interim leadership. But between the lines, everyone understood what it meant. Preston Holt was out. The building felt different that day. Quieter. People walked through the halls with a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. For years, Preston had been a looming, erratic presence. Now there was a void, and all eyes, whether openly or discreetly, turned toward me. I spent the morning in back-to-back meetings with department heads and legal teams, stabilizing operations, reassuring European investors, setting up new internal review systems. For the first time, no one talked over me. No one checked with Preston. My directives stood on their own. Around noon, Richard asked to see me. His office felt smaller than it used to. The mahogany desk that had once intimidated me now just looked like old wood. He sat with his hands folded, eyes tired. "They voted this morning," he said quietly. "They want you to step in as interim CEO during the investigation." I kept my expression calm, but inside something shifted. For years, I'd done the work without the title. Now the title was coming to find me. "I expected as much," I said. Richard looked at me for a long time. "You've changed," he murmured. "No," I replied. "You're just seeing me clearly for the first time." He exhaled heavily. "I built this company for Preston. I believed in him. I thought if I pushed hard enough, he'd grow into it." I sat down across from him. "You built it for a version of him that never existed, and you ignored the version of me that was right in front of you." For a moment, the great Richard Holt looked like a man, not a patriarch. I don't know if I can forgive myself for that, he said. I didn't offer him comfort. I wasn't here to heal his guilt, but I did say, then don't repeat it. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Preston. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was a mixture of bitterness and desperation. They turned on me, he spat. All of them, even Dad. They didn't turn on you, I said quietly. They finally saw you. He laughed, sharp and ugly. Enjoy it while it lasts, Marlowe. They'll turn on you too. Maybe, I replied, but I'll stand on truth when they do. He hung up before I could say more. That night, after the board's official announcement went live, I stood alone in the top-floor conference room, lights dimmed, looking out over the city. The skyline shimmered with quiet intensity. This was the same view I'd grown up watching from a distance, always Preston's world, always someone else's legacy. Now it was mine to shape. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like clarity. I whispered to the empty room, we're not done yet. Because even though Preston was out of the building, the emotional reckoning within our family hadn't happened. Richard still hadn't fully faced the weight of his choices. Preston still thought this was temporary, and I still had to decide whether to rebuild the empire that hurt me or reshape it entirely. The final act wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about what came after. And that would be my choice. The family meeting wasn't called by Richard this time. It was called by me. After weeks of secrets, board battles, and public reshuffling, there were things that needed to be said face to face, not in boardrooms, not in whispered hallway conversations. In a strange way, I needed this moment as much as they did. Not to prove anything, to close something. I chose the old dining room in the family estate for the meeting. The long oak table was the same one where Preston and I had spent countless dinners performing the illusion of a perfect family. I remembered sitting at that table as a teenager, listening to my father praise Preston's natural leadership, while I silently passed the dishes, the invisible architect behind his achievements. That room had held years of quiet betrayals. It was only fitting it held the truth too. Richard arrived first, his steps heavy. He looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. You picked quite the stage, he muttered. I didn't pick it, I said. You built it. Preston showed up late, unshaven, wearing a crumpled jacket. The defiance in his eyes was still there, but beneath it was something rawer, resentment mixed with confusion, maybe even grief. He threw himself into a chair at the far end of the table, as if marking territory that no longer existed. This is pointless, he said immediately. You got what you wanted, CEO, board's pet, congratulations. This isn't about titles, I replied. He scoffed. Sure it is. Richard sat at the head of the table, silent for a long time. This family is broken, he finally said, and I let it happen. Preston snapped. You let her destroy it. I leaned forward, voice steady. I didn't destroy anything, Preston. I exposed what was already there. His fist hit the table. You wanted to humiliate me? No, I said softly. I wanted to survive you. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Richard looked at me. You planned all of this. It wasn't an accusation, it was an acknowledgement. I prepared for what you ignored, I said. For years, I watched you hand everything to someone who never earned it while I held the company together in the background. I gave you loyalty, and you gave me invisibility. I stopped waiting for you to see me. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening just enough for me to notice. I thought I was protecting you. No, I said gently. You were protecting him, and it cost us everything. Preston's voice cracked with anger. You were always jealous. Jealous, I repeated, of someone who coasted on my work, who tried to sabotage me when he couldn't compete? No, Preston, I was furious, not because you had what I wanted, but because you wasted it. For the first time, his bravado faltered. I was supposed to be the one, he whispered. I didn't gloat. I didn't attack. I simply said, you never wanted to lead, you just wanted to be crowned. Richard leaned back, running a hand over his face. I built this empire believing my legacy would be carried by my son. I never thought it would be my daughter who had the strength to save it. I met his gaze, my voice soft but unwavering. Then start seeing me as the person who did. For a long moment, the three of us sat in that room surrounded by the ghosts of who we used to be. Preston, the golden boy who believed legacy was owed to him. Richard, the patriarch who mistook his hopes for truth. And me, the daughter who had spent a lifetime in the shadows, finally stepping into her own light. Preston stood suddenly, chair scraping against the floor. I'm done. I didn't stop him. He walked out without looking back. For the first time, I didn't feel anger watching him leave. I felt release. Richard stayed seated. I don't know if we can fix this, he said quietly. We don't have to fix what was, I replied. We have to build what comes next. For the first time, he nodded, not as a man issuing approval, but as a man accepting truth. When I left the estate that night, the air was crisp, and the house behind me stood like a monument to everything that had been broken. But I didn't look back. That chapter was closed. The first Monday I walked into the building as interim CEO, the air felt different. Not just because my name was on the memos, but because, for the first time, people looked at me and saw authority, not an afterthought. The boardroom, once dominated by my father's presence and Preston's performance, now had a quiet, focused energy. I sat at the head of the table, not as someone who had seized power through noise, but as someone who had earned it through precision, resilience, and truth. Catherine sat to my left as legal counsel, Thomas dialed in remotely, and department heads filled the seats around me. I started the meeting not with a speech, but with a simple line. "We're rebuilding," I said, "not around a name, around integrity." No one interrupted. No one smirked. They listened. I outlined the reforms: transparent financial protocols, stricter oversight on expansion, opening leadership programs for talented employees regardless of last names. There were a few raised eyebrows when I announced we'd be dissolving certain legacy perks that Preston had abused, but the overall reaction wasn't resistance, it was relief. Later that week, I flew to Zurich to meet directly with the European investors. No entourage, no theatrics, just me, the numbers, and the vision. Elise greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "It's about time," she said. During that meeting, I laid out not just strategy, but a shift in philosophy. "This company was built on family legacy," I told them. "But legacy means nothing without accountability. From now on, we earn trust, not demand it." When I left that room, their support wasn't just verbal. It was immediate, tangible. Contracts renewed. Partnerships expanded. Confidence restored. Back in Boston, Richard slowly began stepping back from day-to-day involvement. He never formally apologized for the years he'd overlooked me, but his actions began to speak quietly. He started showing up to board meetings not as the unquestioned king, but as a man finally willing to let someone else lead. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself alone in the executive suite, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows. For years, I'd stared at this view and felt like an outsider pressing her hands against glass. Now, I stood on the inside, steady, no longer needing anyone's validation. I thought about Preston not with anger but with a bittersweet understanding. He'd chosen entitlement over growth. I had chosen the opposite. We both got what we built. I thought about my younger self, the girl who worked twice as hard to be seen half as much. She would have cried standing here. I didn't, I just breathed. Catherine knocked on the door, stepping in with her usual quiet confidence. "They're already talking about making your interim title permanent," she said. I smiled. "Let them talk." She tilted her head. "You're not surprised?" "No," I said softly. "For the first time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." We stood there in silence for a moment, looking out at the city. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still wounds that would take time to heal, relationships that might never fully mend. But the weight that had pressed down on me my entire life was gone. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something honest, something lasting. When I finally left the office that night, the city was alive below me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was escaping anything. I was walking toward everything.